It's still good morning. No, it's well into good afternoon. 12:42, guys. We're running quite late. So I'd like to say the next rule when you come to one of these functions is read your program. Did anybody see a tea break there? You've just eaten your lunch. Sorry about that. We should have made it more clear. But anyhow, the chef put the food out and the food was eaten. And you guys have had some nice chats and conversations because it was hard to get you back in here. And that networking is what we all come to these functions for as well. So there's value in everything. So my next panel, we're going to change a little bit and bring it to Africa. And the topic is tourism and hospitality innovation in the Pan-African context. So we're sort of going a little bit beyond Fourth Industrial Revolution to innovation generally, but we're saying across Africa and in Africa. So I'm going to ask my panelists to join me on the stage. I hope you're all mic'd up. It's Volker Heiden, who's waiting here. He's the VP of Protea Marriott International. It's Dr. Albert Kimbu. Is Albert here? Hi, Albert, and I haven't even greeted you. From Surrey University in the UK. It's Judy Gopher. I'm very bad at the last part of her surname. Gona, Judy Gona. And Andrew Hosking. And as before, I'll give you a little bit more of a bio as I ask them to give an initial contribution on their thoughts on our topic, which is innovation in the Pan-African context. So again, probably in no particular order, I'm going to start with Volker. So as I mentioned, Volker is actually the Area Vice President, Marriott International Hotels, running Africa, and I think it's maybe more than Africa, or is it just Africa? Just Africa, only with just 90 hotels, so quite significant. That includes a lot of brands that we know because of the Protea being bought by Marriott, so African Pride Hotels. There's also the Autograph Collection, Century City, Marriott Hotel Crystal Towers in Century City, sorry. And before that, he was in the Caribbean. Gosh, it was very nice in the Caribbean, I think, huh? And Latin America region. He's been 21 years with Marriott International, and originally is from Germany and was schooled and educated in Germany. So, Volker, I was also looking at Marriott, and I mentioned it when I spoke to Arthur earlier. Marriott, in the last 2 years, has been on Forbes' list of the 21 most innovative companies on the globe. Not hotel companies, not any particular type of companies, but most innovative companies. They're in the top 25, and they're a hotel group. And probably needless to say, they are the only hotel group getting that accolade. So something's going on at Marriott. So tell us all about it, Volker, and tell us about how that can transpire into and what's appropriate for the Pan-African context from your side. Thoughts?
First of all, good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be here today. It's a good question. The one thing I would start off probably what you're saying is we think of these revolutions in blocks, but that's not the reality. Innovation goes over time, right? And someone mentioned earlier when we replaced physical room keys with key cards, people thought, wow, that's revolutionary, right? Today, it's a commodity, and we're already working, obviously, on the next stage where we use our mobile phone to enter the guest room, our room. So innovation is constant, and I would say Marriott has always been innovating. Most of you don't know, Marriott was actually in the 50s a company who invented airline catering. It was a business, yes, it's a business we had. Mr. Marriott felt we came from the food industry. Marriott was founded in 1927. As a food company, we had restaurants, fast food, so to speak, root beer stands. That was in the time when there was a prohibition, alcohol was not allowed. And then Mr. Marriott Sr. had the great idea, if I serve hot Mexican food, people drink more root beer. So that's we came into the industry. And only in 1957, Marriott started in the hotel business with a motor lodge. So really over time, Marriott has been innovating all along. Fast forwarding now, since our current CEO...
Was it your phone?
Yes, maybe. Since our current CEO, Arne Sørensen, took over the helm, I think it has been accelerated. I think we come to the realization that even in the hospitality industry, it's more than just cleaning rooms, serving food. In fact, a lot of people now say Marriott is not in the hospitality industry, we are in the brand industry. We own 30 different brands, and there's a big focus on driving the value of those brands, Marriott being a publicly traded company. It's all about how do we differentiate the 30 brands internally, but also most importantly to our customers. Also, one statement is our big competitors, people always say Hilton, Hyatt, Accor, these are clearly competitors, but the big competitors now are the online travel agents, Booking.com, Expedia, Airbnb, Google going forward, like you mentioned earlier. So the industry has really completely changed. In terms of Africa, just to disappoint you a little bit, we don't have, as a company, an Africa strategy. And the reason really is, Africa is not that different than any other country or continent in the world. We operate probably in most countries, it's probably a shorter list to list those countries where we don't operate in. I personally worked and lived in Europe, in Asia, in Latin America, in the US, and now in Africa. And especially young people, they behave the same all over the world. It's all about the mobile phone, it's about data, connectivity, and there's really no difference. So there's really no need for a company like us to develop a certain strategy for a continent or a country. What I would say, though, is in terms of technology, and we have focused on the customer experience a lot. So I want to walk away a little bit from that is our technology is also focused on our employees and training. And again, we had a lot of legacy technology in the past. Like any other company, any other hospitality industry, we focused on classroom training, we flew people into locations, we trained. Now, this is changing dramatically. We have 8,000 online training courses on our intranet. And the beauty is, now in the past, as a receptionist was trained to be a receptionist. Now a receptionist can, in his spare or her spare time, become an accountant, become a revenue manager, become a sales and marketing manager. So it really opens up a lot more opportunity for the new workforce to upskill themselves and to move into different career opportunities.
Thanks, Volker. So I think key lessons there, you talked about technology and adapting. Technology is incremental. You were innovating before, we're now innovating, and there will always be innovation coming, and that you're adopting that globally. And I think interesting that you say Africa's no different. So what the young people in particular want and what the hotel staying guests want is that seamless travel experience and that great service. And then you're using technology for employees, 8,000 online training courses to enable your employees to upgrade themselves, to move sideways and get different experiences. I think that's fantastic. Okay, now I've got to just slap myself on the wrist. I forgot to do something the organizers said I must do, which is, guys, we are being live streamed, and please tweet or please Instagram us or whatever it is you do, YouTube or whatever. And the hashtags are at STHATUJ, so at STH@UJ, at hashtag STH50, hashtag STH legacy. I think that's enough. Okay, I got it wrong. Follow us on at STH@UJ and tag us at hashtag STH50, hashtag STH legacy. Have I got it right now? Thank you. Tick. Judy, I'm going to move on to you. I've met Judy quite a number of times over the last couple of years at different conferences in Ghana, in Africa, the Airbnb conference. Judy's from Kenya, and she has a wealth of knowledge on sustainable travel and tourism across this continent. In fact, she has amazing accolades. I'll just read a couple of them out because I can't go through all of them. She's been a judge of the World Travel and Tourism Council for Tomorrow Awards. She's a board member of the Global Sustainable Tourism Council. She's an advisory board member of the International Ecotourism Society. And she's recently become a board member of Fair Trade and Tourism, which I think most of us in South Africa know. In 2019, she was awarded the Sustainable Citizen Award by Forbes Women Africa, or Women in Africa. So she's got amazing accolades. She runs her own company now called Sustainable Travel and Tourism Agenda. I follow her on Twitter, and she's prolific about lots of fantastic things to do with sustainability in Africa. So Judy, your perspectives on innovation in hospitality and tourism in Africa, perhaps a little bit about Kenya. It was interesting that Arthur said Kenya and South Africa are up there, but you're better at some things, we're better at other things. Any ideas around that? And do you agree with Volker that it's the same in Africa as it is elsewhere?
Good afternoon. First of all, let me have this disclaimer that I work from what I call the grassroots communities. Sorry.
Whose phone is this?
No, my mic. Okay, we're back. So I have learned a lot of what I know and advocates in tourism by working with communities. So that's why I say that my place has been not the boardroom, not the classroom, but the grassroom, because we sit under trees most of the time when we talk with communities. But talking about innovation and in tourism and hospitality, sometimes you're tempted to think that innovation and Africa are not compatible. Because whether we talk about the second industrial revolution, the third industrial revolution, and all the innovations in it, Africa is always catching up. We are always playing catching up. And when we talk about innovations that will affect tourism and hospitality, we think about the global tourism pie and the percentage that Africa has today, which is just about what, 6%?
5%, 6%.
5% or 6%. And so you begin to ask yourself, isn't it time that we had in some of this innovation coming out of Africa to help us with this acceleration? But I think one thing is for sure, that if Africa becomes open and adaptive to this fourth industrial revolution, it could be one of the catalysts that gives us a bigger pie, a bigger piece of the overall tourism pie, but only if we don't play politics with this revolution, because Africa likes to play politics with everything. One of the earlier panelists said that there are many homes in Africa that still don't have electricity. Mm-hmm. Not because they can't, but because we play politics with everything. Today we have African heads of states that shut down social media platforms during elections. This is playing politics with the Industrial Revolution. So if we don't play politics with this revolution, it's a great opportunity for Africa, because there is every pointer that the next big thing or space where tourism will grow globally is indeed in Africa. So an immediate challenge is, how do you take away the politics out of it so that you let it happen or grow for tourism without all these interruptions? Another point I would like to make is that I love this fourth industrial revolution, because for tourism, it has brought down walls for many communities and people who were excluded from tourism. We've just heard about Airbnb. Without Airbnb, there's a lot told of women who will never have been part of the tourism value chain. So it has brought down, it has the opportunity to bring down many walls and make tourism more inclusive. But again, we've got to embrace it, and we've got to accept the change and remove all the politics out of it. I know today that if you're a big influencer in social media, for example, in Africa, in most places, let me talk about Kenya, you're so sure that the security agencies are on your back. Just because you have many followers, and so you have potential to say something that might disrupt the system. And these are the threats, real threats for the fourth industrial revolution and innovation that will take place, and how it will transform travel and tourism in the long term. Another thing about this industrial revolution that is good for Africa is that we do not have to repeat some mistakes or go over the same journey like those who have gone before us. And here I want to use examples of the definition of luxury and the inclusion of the evolution of packaging in plastic, and the definition of luxury in our hospitality sector, with all the small little packagings everywhere defined as luxury. We don't have to do that, because technology and the spaces provided by technology today are actually persuading people. You can persuade people to change behavior, and we don't have to do exactly the same thing. So persuasive consumption for a better travel industry, we have a great opportunity to do that. we can kick plastic out of our hospitality industry in Africa and save ourselves all the garbage that is ending up in our oceans and in many different places. So in that sense, there's an opportunity for the industry to embrace technology through persuasive consumption in different platforms, so we can have a more sustainable tourism sector.
Thanks, Judy. So saying that, one, we need to think about innovation coming from Africa, not how we adapt to it, but we are the innovators. And we can also leapfrog using technologies. We can use technologies to be more embracing of all levels of our society, being involved in our industry. That our industry has huge potential on this continent, which I totally agree with. And then you put the big challenge out there, if we don't get our politics right, I don't think we'll get tourism right or many other things right, unfortunately. What a massive challenge. And an interesting dimension when you mentioned that people who have got a lot of followers on social media are immediately seen potentially as a threat to the politicians, because you can just influence people's thinking. But the good thing is you can use social media to influence people's behavior about plastics, which we don't have here. We've got glass bottles. That's fantastic. Good start. Okay, I'm going to move on. I'm going to go to Dr. Albert Kimbu next. So you're a senior lecturer in hospitality and tourism and director of postgraduate research at Surrey, which is where I was, but I think I was there before you were born. But anyhow, it's good to have somebody from my alma mater university here. You particularly concentrate on research and development entrepreneurship, stakeholder networks, women and inclusive development in hospitality and tourism. You've published widely on these topics. You did your BA in English language and literature first, though, so you weren't at all in tourism, but then you got into heritage management with an MA, and then you did do your PhD in tourism at Nottingham University, Nottingham-Trent. I'd love to know what you did your PhD in, but then, of course, what we'd like to know is, well, you come from Africa, you're from Cameroon, no? Yeah, but we've exported you to the UK, which is a good thing. We're exporting talent and innovative people to the developed world to help them come right. I hope. But what's your thoughts on innovation and disruption in Africa, and how do we create a sustainable growing industry here?
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to the panel. Well, let's look at innovation. What is it all about? What is it all about? What type of innovation do we talk about when we look at innovation in a Pan-African context, in hospitality, tourism, and events? Is it ad hoc innovative activities, which is what we would tend to find in many small, micro, medium-sized businesses? Is it incremental innovative activities or incremental innovation, which tends to come gradually and slow-paced? Or is it rapid innovation, which causes disruptions, like we just saw in the case of Airbnb and how it just changed and shaped the whole nature of the hospitality, tourism, and events industry these days? Why is this important? Because my focus, actually, most of my research has concentrated around women and entrepreneurship and micro and small businesses. Are they innovative? Have they caught on the ball? How are women included in this drive? I once had a question: who gives you the right to talk about women at a conference?
And your answer?
My answer? Because I love women. It was simple and straightforward. I don't want to continue with the other things to say. Let's leave it for another day. But it comes back from my background, how I was brought up. And my mom was a driver in the house, and she was a trader. And it's been a long story since then. And I saw the ups and downs she went through. She was in the transport business, she was in the clothing business, she was in the F&B business, in the catering business, and she more or less is a serial entrepreneur, successful at times, unsuccessful at times. She failed, and she always stood up. It's about having that resilience. And for me, resilience is key. How do women become resilient, and how do they adopt technologies to enable them grow their businesses? And moving beyond a particular stage, not survival entrepreneurship, but more or less starting to grow and thinking of becoming gazelles. I don't know if you're familiar with the term gazelle entrepreneurs, or constrained gazelles. In Africa, what do we find? We find constrained gazelles. They have the potential, but the environment, the context, limits growth. And the context here is not only about geographical context, it's more or less the organizational context, the political context, the social context, the technological context. And if you look at the African context, Pan-African context, I've done a lot of research in Nigeria, in Ghana, in Cameroon. That's where most of my research focuses. We've leaped from the first, we've not even gone to the first industrial revolution, we are the fourth industrial revolution at the moment. And how has that impacted on the way we build the industry? How has that impacted on the way micro, small, and medium-sized businesses actually engage with tourists? And tourists, for me, are domestic tourists. Unfortunately, most government data talks about international visitors. That's the minority of revenue which is generated from tourism. And there is data to support that. All of us, most of us here are Africans. How many times do we go out on the weekend for funerals, for marriages, for wakes, for other ceremonies? Who are those who run those businesses? The transport sector, the caterers, the small bed and breakfast facilities. Who are those who run and manage them? It's the women in most cases, or where I come from. I don't know about the South African context. I can't talk about it. But across Western Central Africa, it's the women. But yet, nobody talks about it. Nobody hears anything about them. Are they using technologies to grow their businesses? Is it impacting on how they manage their businesses? Because management is key to success, without which they all fail. And that's why you'd find most of them, within 3 or 4 years, they are out of business. But then there is research which shows that through competition, enabling an environment which would enable those women who always see themselves as competitors, online and offline, is going to create that environment which will enable them to prosper. And it's a very small example from what I did in Cameroon a couple of years ago. I organized a workshop for women entrepreneurs. They all, when they got together in the room, some of them knew themselves already, but they didn't speak to each other. At the end of that one-day workshop, they formed a WhatsApp group, and it's been functional up till today. And what's happening about that group is that they use it now to leverage opportunities. You are in another town, you've got a business or an event to run in another town. In that town, you just call, hey, this is what I got doing. I don't need to transport everything there. You come in, you use my resources, and you get a cut of it. And it just goes that way. And it's actually morphed into something more, into an association now. And it's as a result of using technology. Very simple WhatsApp messages. Simple, not complex stuff. It works. But then you need to bring them together. You need to have them understand that you can work together. Do they have the skills to leverage it? That's one thing which is lacking. The capabilities. Who is going to create that platform which will enable these women to get together, to learn? Because learning is one key here, education. And it must not be at universities. Universities can act as mentors, can provide that environment. But that learning takes place amongst themselves. And finally, I'm just going to round up. The fourth industrial revolution, how is it affecting higher education and the business communities? Is there that synergy? We researchers have been accused of acting in isolation. And that's a crime which sometimes I do fall victim to. And I've decided now most of my research is going to be action research. That's why if you tell me about methodologies and A, B, C, and D, I tell you, I go down to the field, I talk to the people there. So there is need for that communication and interaction between academics and local, those businesses, small businesses, on how to engage and what to do. They have the issues. We don't sit on our pedestals and think we are going to impose on them. If there is no dialogue, if there is no communication, it's not going to work. And there is need, and technologies play an important role in creating that platform. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. I love the way you talked about innovation. Again, I think a lot of people say it can be incremental, it can be small. I love the way you're saying, and one of the things we need to do in Africa is recognize that we have a lot of entrepreneurial businesses supporting domestic tourism. And I'm a huge believer in the domestic tourism industry, both in Africa and Africans traveling within their own continent, not being aspirationally going off to Paris and London, but moving between our own cities. But that the women are the backbone of a lot of our industry, and that technology in its simplest forms can be an enabler. And WhatsApp, fantastic. But very interesting that you said, but they wouldn't have done that if you weren't doing your research and you brought them together. So that's the problem. Who's going to bring them together? Who's going to ignite those ideas that they can start collaborating and leverage their businesses? And Vusi's gone, but I think some aspects of what Journey's doing are aiming at doing that in South Africa. So it's powerful. So talking about WhatsApp, Andrew and I, technology has failed us. He's been trying to send me a CV, and he's been trying to send me it on well, he's on an iPhone or some other funny thing, and I'm on a Samsung, and I have not received the CV on an SMS or on a WhatsApp, although he sent it, so it's not on my phone. So he is, as he says on the program here, Director of Operations, Central Northern Region. I love Central Northern Region. Does anybody know where that is? for Corcoran. So that's interesting. He's been with Corcoran many, many years. I think he's initially with them for about 10 years, then out of the country, based in Dubai, and running all their offshore non-South African Corcoran operations. He's been back in South Africa now for 2 years, so probably an interesting perspective across the continent in terms of Corcoran's operations, also in being outside South Africa and then back in South Africa. So Andrew, your thoughts on innovation in hospitality and tourism in the African or Pan-African context?
Thank you, Gillian. Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. The first comment I want to make goes back to a question that came in the earlier panel with regards to hospitality. And that is that people stay with people. And the technology must be an enabler. It must be something that functions in the background. It's something that can free up people, like was being discussed in the earlier presentation. But ultimately, if we look at tourism and hospitality in Africa, we are the next undiscovered continent. There's a lot of interest in Africa. We're seeing big multinational firms come in from a hospitality perspective into Africa. Marriott may not have a strategy other than they want to grow in Africa. Radisson put together a significant strategy about 5-10 years ago, and they've been successful in opening a number of hotels around the continent. I worked in South Africa for about 20 years, then left and worked in Africa specifically for about 10 years, living in Zambia, Kenya, and in Dubai. And looking after the Corcoran portfolio of hotels outside of South Africa really gave me a unique perspective on some interesting aspects of tourism. The one is, when I left South Africa, I found us a very inwardly focused country. We were not really connected to the rest of the world from a hospitality perspective, and we tended, not just in hotels, but in restaurants and in food and beverage and in catering, to really look at the guy down the road or the next best restaurant in Cape Town. We have a hotel in Abu Dhabi. It's got 36 different nationalities working in that property. And when we opened that particular hotel, it was incredible to try and harness the energy of all those different nationalities. And I thought that that was quite unique until I went to Zambia and Kenya. And in the Zambian and the Kenyan aspect, the number of different sub-nationalities within those countries is quite remarkable, and the difference of the people in those entities. Kenneth Kaunda, who was the leader of Zambia for many, many years, trying to harness that energy called about one nation, one country, to try and get 76 different tribes of people to work together for the betterment of that particular country. But Africa's got an incredible amount to offer when it comes to experience. And the business tourist, the leisure tourist of today is no longer collecting cities, they're collecting experiences. And it's all about the experience that they have when they come to whichever country it is in the world. You no longer go to Paris to climb the Eiffel Tower. 20 years ago, that's what people did. They came back from their experience and said, I climbed the Eiffel Tower, I can tick that box. And they went to China and they walked across the Great Wall of China and they said, I ticked that box. People today come back and they tell about the people that they met, the food experiences that they had, the local people that they met. And one of the most amazing reserves in Zambia is a place called South Luangwa. And Wilderness Safaris had an operation there, which was quite remarkable in how they had integrated with the local community and brought the local community to meet the international tourist and really have a completely different experience. Wilderness Safaris followed on from companies like Conservation Corporation, which then became And Beyond. And there's many examples similar to that throughout the rest of the continent. And there's a lot of untapped, unusual places that we all live and talk about. So everyone knows about Victoria Falls. Very few people know about Devil's Pool within Victoria Falls and the special experience that you can have if you can jump into Devil's Pool and the experience that you go back. So I took my in-laws that happened to be German. We went there about 10 years ago. Every single dinner party, event, function that they go to, that's one of the things that they talk about. There's about 2 million people a month that go to Sandton City Shopping Centre. How many of those people go to Vilakazi Street and go and experience some of the catering that happens? And I think from a tourism perspective, we are always pushing to the front the easy wins rather than the actual authentic experiences that one can have. Lamu Island off the coast, and you'll know Lamu Island, on the coast of Kenya, is a beautiful, untouched wilderness experience. They don't have cars, they don't have motorbikes. People go there to actually connect back to reality. I just want to quickly talk about innovation in Africa. Many of you will know of Lobster Inc. It's a South African company. Marriott use them, IHG use them, Hilton use them. They do the online training courses that you were talking about earlier. It started here in South Africa and was developed out of a need to bring training to their lodges that were operating in very isolated parts of the country. Another example out of Kenya is M-Pesa. It's a banking app that allows you to pay, transfer, pay for goods, transfer money between friends, between relatives. But we do have innovation in Africa. It's the fact that we can't unlock it out of our own borders and get it across the continent. Your example about women, I've got a funny anecdote. We opened a hotel in Lagos, and we have a kitchen there. It's a 195-bedroom hotel, and we've got an amazing kitchen. It does about 300 people on a Sunday lunch. And we were battling with some of the local authentic dishes from Nigeria and why we couldn't quite get the recipe and the ingredients and the taste profile right. We had an epiphany and realized that 90% of the people in the kitchen were men. And we needed to realize that in the home environment, when you're cooking traditional authentic food, it's actually the woman that is doing that. So needless to say, the hotel had to turn that paradigm on its head and start bringing some more women into the kitchen. Sure. And from that moment on, we started getting real taste that you would recognize if you worked in West Africa.
Great.
The last couple of examples that I want to give is that in terms of the biggest issue that many of the people that I've met in all of these various countries is training and development, learning and development. And it's not learning how to be a leader. The Kenyans are great at hospitality. It's a subject taught in school. They know hospitality, but it's the technical skills that are really required to differentiate one experience from another experience. We spoke about Airbnb, and Airbnb has had a growth in Kenya of 68% from last year, from 2017 to 2018. Admittedly off quite a low base, but that's quite fast. Our country has put in place a target. We're currently on about 10.6 million tourists, and we say we're going to have 20 million. Kenya has done the same thing. They're currently on about 10 million, and they say they want to have 30 million. 30 million tourist experiences in the next 3 years. 1.6 million are international. So the balance of that 30 million are all going to come from domestic tourism. And there was a call-in show to one of the radio stations last week, and one of our senior people in tourism was asking, why are we talking about shot left and local campaigns? The industry survives and thrives on local tourism. The international tourist is the cream on the top of the cake, but local tourism is what's going to make it all happen. So that's the end of my story.
Great. Andrew, thank you very much. What I think has been really interesting is that everybody's take is entirely different. We're saying innovation of Pan-African innovation, and we're getting how to help women. We're getting 76 different types of people or tribes of people in the hotel in Zambia. And I think what Andrew brought to the party as well is innovation is also in how do we innovate the experience so the tourist, and it doesn't have to use technology, so the tourist gets that very special, uniquely African differentiated experience, because that's what tourists are looking for. They're looking for experiences. So we're seeing a whole different dimension, but I think through it all was Africa's got a lot of strengths to offer. It's got a lot of innovation happening. You mentioned Lobster Inc., Travel Start as well, one of the fantastic online OTAs is a South African developed product. So we're seeing amazing things coming out of Africa already. M-Pesa, which is often put forward as an example. Can I brag for a minute? We did the tourism strategy for Kenya, and the 21 million comes out of my spreadsheets. But I'm going to be mean now. I'm going to sideswipe Volker. I'm sorry about this. And then I'm going to ask Volker and Judy to comment. This went past my Twitter feed yesterday, and I think it's one of the things about innovation, and you talked about it, but this is from Emily Hagedorn. I don't know if anybody knows her. She's a Dutch-based tourism sustainability consultant writer. She's very vocal, And she said this, she said, "Dear at Marriott International, can you please help your recently acquired Protea hotels to not serve a cheese board dessert all wrapped up in single-use plastics? Little heads up from a friend." And then other people comment, "Not sure about Marriott International is in the best position to provide guidance. Based on my recent stay at a residence in New York, there was way more single-use plastics than any hotel I've ever seen." So sorry, but that came past my Twitter feed. So I think one of the things you talked about it, Judy, and I'd like you to comment, is we can lead on this in Africa in clever ways using different types of innovation. Volker, what's Marriott doing about sustainability and all of these climate change?
Great question, great comment. I think we all agree we can do a lot more to eliminate plastic and work much more sustainable. A couple of things on a global level. Marriott just recently came out to eliminate for most of our brands plastic shampoo bottles and lotions and all that. So we're moving very fast into containers, which can be replaced, which can be and then refilled. Being a big company and also looking at liability, it's quite complicated. It's a lot more complicated than people think because we have to make sure that these cannot be manipulated. They need to be cleaned correctly, sealed, and so forth. So that's something we're dealing with. We also came out to eliminate plastic straws. We actually, in South Africa, we were the first one within the company who replaced them with biodegradable materials about a year ago. And then here's another good story. We actually recently realized that we have a lot of bed linens which we can't reuse. So we came up with creating a workshop locally in Cape Town, which is repurposing these bed linen into school shirts for children. So we set up actually an enterprise for 13 women in Cape Town, a workshop, and they have actually produced over 1,200 school shirts for school in one of our communities in Cape Town. Then we said, well, we have a lot more opportunities because we have plastic laundry bags. So now what we're doing, we're using these sheets to sew in these workshops, linen laundry bags. And now we're going to distribute those all in our hotels. So these are small steps, but absolutely in the right direction.
And it's showing a different type of innovation. And it's bringing innovation to sustainability and single-use plastics, not throwing away the sheets. Fantastic. Judy, any thoughts on how important innovation and sustainability and these types of things are?
It is very important that some of these leading brands, that when they come to Africa, we want to see them as benchmarks of where our tourism should be going. And when certain practices are not standard across the board, it becomes a problem. And I have a very practical example, and I won't mention the name of the brand, but they are in Nairobi now. And one of the general manager came across one of my tweets. Like you say, I tweet about everything and anything that is sustainable. So he invited us and said, can you come and let's have a chat about this? And I researched the background of what they're doing in other places, how they run their operations, some of the things that they don't do anymore. And I found out that in America, they no longer use plastic water bottles, right? Single use. But in their hotel in Nairobi, they're using plastic water bottles. So I asked him, why the double standards? Why do you come to Africa and change your standards? Is it because it's a lesser market and it's okay to do certain things here, bad things, certain things here, and not do them where you come from? So my challenge to some of these big brands is that you have an opportunity. You are at the top end of the market in terms of practice, of numbers and everything. You are in an influential position. You can use that position to transform this industry. And where we have the opportunity to grow, like we're saying, Africa is the next a big growth area for tourism. I repeat myself, we don't want to import practices that are not acceptable in other parts of the world today. And he told me bluntly that probably you care, but your government and everybody else don't care. Nobody asked us when we were looking for the license. So we are competing with people who are doing exactly the same thing, so we will do it. because we want to make profits for shareholders.
So you're bringing the politics back here as well. Your
Exactly.
government didn't say anything.
Your government didn't say anything, so we will do it because we have to make profits for our shareholders. So we have companies that are supposed to be influencers, but are still accountable to their shareholders and not to society in this age of value-based businesses and in this era of sustainability.
I think you're talking about an issue there which probably we're not going to have time to discuss. I use the word often inclusive capitalism or stakeholder capitalism, and it's useful to see that I think even now globally, the US, was it Forbes again, or a group of captains of industry in the US, listed companies on the stock exchange, I think, brought out something that said capitalism has to change, and this is how we need to change to be capitalism, or stakeholder capitalism, or capitalism with a purpose. It's a tough one.
If I can add maybe very quickly. So when Marriott took over Protea in 2014, Protea for many, many years already had discarded plastic bottles and he was using glass bottles. When we came in, naturally, we kept that system because it was a great system. It was in place, it was efficient.
And I hope you exported it to your hotels elsewhere.
And to a certain extent, absolutely, yes.
Okay. Corcoran, what are they doing about sustainability generally? And I don't want, a quick answer, plastics, carbon footprints, water recycling.
So from a South African context, we've been leading the way, and as you probably know, we have a number of IHG hotels within our portfolio, and we've also got some Radissons and a Westin or two. And what we found is, in terms of, a bit like the example that was just related, is our energy reduction programs that we put in place about 8 years ago are class leading, and in fact, when you compare our statistics versus the IHG hotels and the rest of the portfolio, we're actually way ahead of the target and way ahead of what they are trying to achieve. So in certain aspects, we are ahead. The Cape Town water crisis taught us all a huge lesson last year, and all of our hotels across the country have implemented those water-saving possibilities that don't impact the customer. So we still put plugs in the bathrooms in Johannesburg. We haven't taken the plugs out, but pretty much everything else that we could learn from that, we have.
Yeah, I think that the water crisis in Cape Town was an amazing blessing in disguise. We really changed the way people use water in Cape Town, people use water in the tourism industry, and I think it's spreading, but I think it hasn't spread enough to how to take all the rest of the continent. I don't really know the rest of the continent.
And then just one last thing, just on waste. One of our hotels in Cape Town has 98% of its waste that normally would have gone to landfill is no longer going to landfill of wet waste. So in other words, there's only 2% left out of all the wet waste that comes out of kitchens, etc., that is going to landfill. And we've got a very strong stated objective to get our waste to landfill down to zero by the 2024. So those initiatives are critical
so
to us.
These are also innovative initiatives. We're just addressing other aspects, not the customer experience per se, but our sustainability on our planet through those
Absolutely.
things. Albert, anything you would like to add on this topic? And I'm going to throw one in. I don't know if you've got an answer for it. The one that is going to be very interesting is the flight shaming thing. And Africa's a long haul for international tourists. We're a long haul destination. And I don't know, how are we going to combat people's carbon footprint when they travel?
Well, that's a good question. Let me start by asking, was I supposed to be here today?
Well, this is a very good answer. We would have rather yes, exactly. This is a very good answer. And this is the challenge of traveling by plane versus value. Yeah.
There is an answer to it. People talking together and being face-to-face is paramount. We're in a people-facing business. Yep. And it's really, really imperative that sometimes we do get to talk to each other, not via Skype, which has proven to have its own shortcomings. Right? So, coming back to that, and then again, one starts thinking about the need for collaborative learning networks, for platforms which ensure that learning takes place. Because no innovation, in as much as it might be fantastic, is going to succeed without learning, without the capabilities and skills and capacities being developed for those concerned. It is really important. So we might come up with the best creations, but then if we can't implement them, they're useless. And with the fast pace of technology these days, what happens? It's created today, it goes out of business, it becomes outdated tomorrow. So there is need for constant retraining. But do we have the skills and capacity? Do we have the capabilities to keep training and retraining those who are working with the system? The big boys are going to have it. But the small mom and pop businesses, what do they do? How do they leverage these constantly evolving technologies to grow their businesses, to create change? Because I believe in the social transformation agenda. Absolutely. Businesses should make profit, of course, but then they should also create impact. They should transform societies. And for me, that's really important. That transformation starts with the self. as the owner of a business, you need to be able to transform yourself. Your vision, your mindset, your purpose is really important. And if you have a clear vision on impacting society, then you catch on with the bandwagon. But then, Judy mentioned something about the politics playing a role in there. What is the internet penetration rate in most African countries? How do those remote communities, which don't have access to the internet, to operate? Can they still leverage it? And what we're doing now, I mean, with a couple of colleagues and some from the World Bank, we are thinking of creating a platform which will be both online and offline and enable access to small businesses, inclusiveness, marginalized communities, those who have been left on the sidelines, those who are not spoken of, but those who are the drivers. That platform will bring those together. In November, actually, I've been invited to a panel by the World Bank and the UNWTO to talk about it in Accra. There's the first Congress on Women in Tourism, which is taking place in Accra in November. And there's also a forum in Sierra Leone after that. And we're going to be talking about this. So the platform basically is going to enable that knowledge exchange to take place.
Fantastic.
It's going to be run and it's going to be managed by the owners, the users.
So you asked and answered your same question. As that's one of the mechanisms for getting this information and keeping people up to date and getting it to the more impoverished people, the less able, less access, no internet. You also talked about online, offline, and clever ways of innovating so that we can make sure that those disadvantaged people are able to still access information and knowledge in some way or other. And you also said, when you fly, you've got to judge what the benefits of the flight are versus the negatives of the flight. And I do think we need to also look at offering people sustainable carbon offsetting options related to their travel, because it's something that's growing at the moment.
Exactly.
I think we've probably got time for 2 or 3 questions from the floor. Volker, yes?
Travel is probably one of the most powerful tools to promote peace and cultural differences. So it's like with water in the water bottles, right? You don't stop drinking water. You deal with the water bottle. I think flights, they need to be more efficient. Technology needs to drive it. They now look at electric engines versus fuel-driven engines. The cost per seat is coming down, or the impact per seat is coming down. So that's what we need to drive. We shouldn't try to prevent travel, because I think it's very, very important.
I would totally agree with you. And I think, again, it's the airline industry has to and is looking at the ways to reduce their carbon footprint to make it a smaller one. At the same time, I think the benefits of travel have to be explained. Like you said, the peace, the integration of cultures. And I think if we look at our African continent, if we didn't have the international tourists, domestic tourism is absolutely important, but the international tourists are supporting a network of something like 7,000 conservation areas and millions of jobs. I've forgotten the job number. And if you want Africa's flora and fauna heritage preserved for the world, we're going to need people coming here. We are. Anybody got a question for any? Yes, there's 2 hands I've seen here. The mic? Yeah, there's a lady. Okay, I've seen 3, and I think that's 1, 2, 3. Yeah, thank you.
Hi. It's not really a question, it's more a statement. It's just how technology and innovation has changed hotels in particular, how people communicate over conferencing. You don't need to leave a room now to have a conference with everyone around in different regions or different countries. And how technology has improved people's voice, not just how we're communicating now, but in particularly a blind person has got technology using voice recognition programs to communicate, and how messaging and WhatsApp has helped video communicating for deaf people. So it's innovative ways of how we're able to communicate, and has improved customer service in hotels in particular. It's not really a question.
No. But thanks, because you give another dimension of how technology is actually helping and leverage bringing people who've got different physical or challenges, I'm supposed to say differently abled people, into the circle of connectivity, economic activity, all those sorts of things. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Raphael. My question has to do with the differences in tourism development across sub-regions on the African continent. If you look at the North Africa, Southern Africa, Eastern Africa is on the high side. Central to Western Africa, there's really on the low side of tourism development. How can we use the 4th Industrial Revolution innovation to bridge this gap between the regional differences on the continent?
Thank you. Does anybody want to take that question? Yeah, you come from that side of the continent, so I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, that's thank you for the question. it's a very important one, and it's something which needs really good reflection. If we look at it from the perspective of international tourism, then that's a very valid point. But then if you look at Nigeria, actually, Nigeria has one of the biggest business tourism markets across Africa. So depending on the type of tourism you're looking at, then those divides come in. But then look at the leisure tourism side of it, it's again that issue of politics, which Judy mentioned. Politics plays a very important role. Those in power, those in positions of authority, have that desire to develop the industry. And that is the crucial question which needs answering. Across, I mean, I've been to Ghana, I've been to Sierra Leone, I've been to Senegal, I've been to Nigeria, I've been across that part of the world. They have fantastic policies, trust me, really good policies. But nobody implements them. And if a revolution needs to take place, it starts with those at the top. They realize the value of it. It's window dressing, but nobody pays attention. Unlike here in South Africa, where the value has been recognized, where its importance is really, really known, and measures put in place to ensure that that industry develops, that industry is functional. In most West African countries, unfortunately, that is not the case. There again, you start thinking about the colonial mindset. A good number of these countries are French-speaking. And the politics behind the French colonial heritage and the English colonial heritage and the importance placed on certain areas contributes to, unfortunately, it's the imbalanced development between regions.
Sure. Please do.
I think in some instances, just within the regions or at country level, the organization, how the tourism industry is organized as a business, can affect how tourism grows in these countries. Because we have a problem of elite capture in the tourism industry in Africa.
What capture?
Elite.
Oh, elite capture.
Now, I will use an example of tourism associations. And I think one of the worst things that happened to tourism in Africa was to form these associations too early before tourism actually took off. And 4 years ago, I think in Kenya, a group of young graduates from university decided that they were going to disrupt and ignore the original, the well-known tourism association in Kenya, the Association of Tour Operators, because of the many barriers to entry. Before you're registered as a tour operator, you need to own a vehicle, you need to have a turnover of so much, you need to market, you need to have this kind of website, you must have an office that has a number of computers and people. Who says you need a computer to be a tour operator today? There's so many things you can do. So they locked out so many other people or other citizens from doing tourism. But these young people disrupted, and they persisted, and they were running their offices. There were like 5 different groups of them sitting in one little space every day and creating their little posters and reaching out to their age groups to travel for a few hours on weekends. On Saturday, let's meet at this bus stop. We are hiring a PSV. We're going into it. We're going off for a day's excursion. Bring your water and bring your own snack. We're going to explore our country and come back in the evening. And the elite operators ran to the government and said, look at them. They're going to affect the quality of our brand. They don't have registered vehicles. They're
Traditional
using
reaction
PSV.
to disruption, complain.
Complain and they complain. But look at what happened in the last 4 years. Kenya's domestic travel is overtaking international travel because of these young disruptors. And that's why I say elite capture. And that elite capture tells us that tourism must happen in a particular way. You must be able to bring tourists internationally. You must receive them at the airport with this special vehicle. You must travel in a particular way.
So you've got, I think you got 2 fantastic answers there. It's the will of the politicians if you want to drive your domestic leisure industry, your leisure industry. And it's, I love that word, elite capture. It's the traditional elitist industry who have the old model in their head, and that's all they've got in their head, and they're excluding everything else. And the innovation is coming to break that apart and to stop it happening, and that's fantastic innovation. Okay, there's a lady with the mic there.
My name is Naniki Zomo, Hospitality Department, UK. My question really is around the attraction of these young minds into the industry. Because we are in an industry where we know very well that there's already been issues around long hours, tedious jobs. You know, people that work in the industry, we know that sometimes they don't even have time to do other things. And then now 4IR is here, and students are already asking, and they're saying, is this going to take our jobs? And we know that we've heard today that that's not the case. But how do we converse with the young people out there, you know, and change this perception that the hospitality industry is a problematic industry? The 4IR is coming to replace the jobs, because we're needing students that are passionate about this industry to be able to study and go into those spaces.
Anybody want to respond to that one about how we engage and motivate the youth to think we're a great industry, not a sort of tedious, long hours or lose our jobs to fourth industrial revolution? Volker?
I think we talked a little bit about this morning in our board meeting, that there's so many jobs in hospitality where people who are going into the industry don't even think about. Revenue management, sales, marketing, finance, analysis. Another good example is we have one of our biggest challenges. We have 7,000 hotels, and we mostly managed and franchised operations. So we have 7,000 agreements with owners, different terms. So just to capture all these contracts into a database, then being able to bill the owners for our services is mind-boggling. And we never got it 100% right over the last 50 years. So now we're using new technology where actually a computer flips through these contracts to create this database. But of course, someone needed to create that computer program in the first place. So this is where jobs are in the future. I think young people have to steer away from housekeeping, waiters, and cooks. Hospitality is much, much bigger than that.
Great.
Can I just add? I mean, Volker has just hit the nail straight on. I think there is still that general misconception of what tourism and hospitality is. And if we as ambassadors of the industry, don't push to change that vision, that misconception in people's minds, it's still going to be the same. I mean, when I did my PhD, my mother-in-law asked me, "You're doing a PhD in tourism?" I never knew they studied tourism. I mean, that's a medical consultant, a senior consultant in Germany. And she asked me the question, I never knew they studied tourism. And that's somebody who goes on holidays 4 times a year. So if you have that conception in your mind, in the developed world, and then think about how we in Africa are going to think about it, we need that change. Mindsets need to change. If we don't change it, it's going to become difficult. And so, as Volker said, hospitality, tourism, events, the leisure business industry involves a diverse and multiplicity of other trades. It's accountancy. It's not only bookkeeping. It's not only room service or front office management, which is what we'll see. And people always complain about the low rates of pay, which is rather unfortunate. So what people see are the negatives. It is our responsibility, it is our duty as ambassadors, as educators, as professionals in the industry to change that mindset.
Fantastic. So a wonderful answer is the industry is much more than people's initial perceptions of it, and it's our job to get that message out there. We're sort of running out of time. I don't know, you guys have had this, any last words, Andrew, or any last words, Judy, on that topic or any other topic? I put you on the spot. Sorry?
My last words will be responding to what we just said about young people and their worry that there are no more jobs in tourism with the fourth industrial revolution. I run a program in Kenya that I call the STTA Young Change Makers. And this is a program with about 17 universities working with the tourism schools in all these universities through an extension learning program. So every month we host an inter-university seminar on a topic of choice by the students. We started in 2017. Last weekend, we held the 27th session of the inter-university seminars, and all these universities sent their students to these seminars. And what I've always told the students, and we have seen transformation in student thinking and allaying of fears of whether there's a future of a career in the tourism or hospitality industry, is because every time we have these cross-learning sessions, they see a new opportunity and a new career in tourism. And I have always maintained and told them that each of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals has a career opportunity for you in tourism. If you look within them deeply, there's something that you can use those 17 SDGs and create a career for yourself in tourism, because tourism is the business of everything and anything, I believe. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. So that was a lovely ending off. Tourism is the business of anything and everything, and there's a role for tourism in every single one of the 17 SDG goals, and everybody can look for their opportunity and what they can do. And I think that's what we heard from the panel about innovation. Pan-African innovation is, it comes on so many different levels in so many different places, from simple small things in communities to hotels embracing sustainability. I mean, the dimensions are immense, and you can choose what you do, you can get involved, you can make this industry work for our continent, and you can embrace innovation for our continent in a big way. Please will you give my panel a big round of applause? They were fantastic. Thank you very much. And then I'm just going to ask Jerry Mabani to step up, and he's the chairman of the board of the School of Tourism and Hospitality, the board on which I sit, and he's just going to give a few closing remarks from our session this morning. You guys want to sit down?
Good afternoon, everyone. And to the panelists, thank you very, very much for very thought-provoking inputs. And I've been asked to do a summary. Why do I have to? I'm taller than you. But again, just a round of applause to the two panelists that were on stage. And to Gillian, thank you very much for a very, very kind of good moderation there. I think you were quite piercing at times, and I quite liked your jabbing with Mr. Arthur there. But I think if I were to kind of just summarize, really for me, what the key takeouts are, because, as I draw to a close and just to thank everyone, I think we, as Africa, we are sitting at a point where, from what everybody has been saying, is that fear not, this is not Armageddon. I think the 4IR is an opportunity more than a threat. I think it's going to do a lot of good for us. I think it creates a little bit of an equalizer. I was very excited by the Airbnb presentation, which talks about how you start to bring in rural communities into the mainstream of technology. Mvusi was talking a little bit about Jenny, which I have the privilege of working with on the team, and the ability to take a small SMME and plug them into technology that allows them to have accessibility to a market in Germany, in the US, or anywhere else in the world. I think those are great transformational initiatives. And when you look at some of the inputs around what technology does in terms of taking away the mundane out of the operations, during the tea break, somebody was telling me about technology that actually fries steaks. And you put stuff on the one side, it comes out medium rare, well done, absolutely on point. And the first thought in my head was, what happens to the chef? But as it turns out, I think the chef can then move into other experiences, and all we are doing more and more is enhancing the guest experience, which is what we're there for, effectively, as tourism practitioners. When you talk about the African innovation initiatives, I think, again, I was quite excited to hear how technology really underpins everything. It's quite important for us to kind of recognize that the issue of the depoliticization of technology is quite a key thing, and I quite like the points that Judy was alluding to on that particular front. We see it happening a lot of times, and it destroys an ability for us to grow in these particular spaces. Experience travelers. I think Africa sits at the cusp of that. I think we have the most exciting, unexplored experiences, and again, technology sits there. If we innovate and actually create world-class experiences all around our assets, attractions, hotels, or whatever it is that we do, and embed that into technology, I think we are onto something great. And I'm quite excited to hear that both panels actually touched on that quite nicely as we go forward. maybe just as I draw to a close, just to say that we've always thought that the woman's place in the kitchen was a very sexy statement until today. So I think sometimes these things come full circle and we learn every day about these things. But again, thanks to the panelists and thanks to all of you for having taken time out. I know that we all have very busy schedules. And Dr. D, I know that it's been a painful few months. And I think to actually see all of the work that you and the team have done coming to fruition, it's really, really exciting. And to the board of STH, I think as the chair of that board, it's an absolute honor and a privilege to work with a team as committed as yourselves. I think each time I walk out of those meetings, I walk out a much better, richer, almost wiser person. And then to the sponsors, supporters, I think we spoke about some of the sponsorships and the support from in the board. I think we really are grateful for the role that you've played. And I may not have thanked someone, but for those that I have not mentioned, please do recognize that we appreciate all your trouble. The sound guys, thank you so much for all your running around and plugging us on. So colleagues, I think with those few words, Dr. D didn't tell me anything else that I should say. So just thank you very much. You can go have the lunch that you didn't finish.